What is one question that you should ask in every single Bible study, after every sermon you listen to, and every time you read God's Word? I propose that the question you should ask every time is, what can I obey from the passage? And that's the question we're going to look at today. What can I obey from the passage? How important it is to make smart applications in Bible study. So this is one of the most important questions you can ever ask in when you study the Bible, but sadly, it often doesn't get asked at all. Much of modern day church life is very passive. People go to church, they sit, they listen, they think that was a good sermon, and then they chat for a few minutes and go home. Do they really remember the sermon? And even more, do they actually follow it? Do they practice what they learn? Here's a little experiment for you. Next time after you go to church, after the sermon's over, you can ask people, what did you think about the sermon? And then ask them, what can you obey from what you learned today? Notice the responses that you get. Do people remember what they learned? Do they feel awkward when they're asked about how they will apply it? These questions and discussions should be normal. We shouldn't feel awkward if someone comes to us and says, what did you learn from the sermon? And I don't really know. Loving Jesus? No. We should know what we learned and we should be excited to take that question. Thank you for asking. Let me tell you what I learned and what I'm going to do. We're told that we should speak in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Our conversation should be filled with talking about how we're going to obey God's word. Now, I've asked these questions of many people, and sadly, I often get very vague responses. Sometimes within minutes of the sermon, churchgoers cannot remember what it was really about. And we're all guilty of this. Sometimes we're absent-minded and don't pay much attention. Sometimes we're listening, but instead of listening with a humble heart to learn, we are looking for points to disagree or criticize. We are trying to rate the pastor or the speaker, and we are judging his sermon, his organization, the way that he speaks, instead of thinking about the content inside and how it can apply to our lives. Now, the same can be true of small group Bible studies. Emphasis is often placed on learning facts, delving into history, expanding doctrinal knowledge. Building up knowledge, though, without life change is not beneficial and only means we'll be held to a stricter standard when we face God. I want to read for us James chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. It says, "But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing." Be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. This is one of our key verses here at Study and Obey. God calls to be doers of the word and not hearers only. That means every single time you join a Bible study, you join a church service, you have devotions, you read God's word, you should ask yourself, what should I obey? The Bible only has one correct interpretation. There is only one meaning of the passage. So I don't mean you should say, what does this passage mean to me? There's one meaning of the Bible. There's one interpretation. But there are many potential applications. Some are unrealistic. Others are too vague. So I want to talk for a minute about making smart applications. Smart applications. And each letter in that word smart is also an acronym. The first is S. S is for specific. Your application should not be too general. You could say, my application from the sermon today is to love others. Well, that's too general. You could say, I will love my wife. That's better, but still too general. You could say, I will love my wife by cooking her a special meal. That is specific. When making applications, you need to be specific. M is for measurable. Is your application something you can measure? Will you be able to definitively say whether you did it or not? Now, it's not good to make an application from God's word, and then at the end of a certain period of time, someone says you did it, and it's so vague that you can't give a yes or no answer. This is closely tied together with being specific. It's very hard to measure, I will love others. Did you love others this week? Well, sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, right? But it's a lot easier to measure, I will love my wife by cooking her a meal this week. If you make that application, you can then see clearly whether you did it or not. A is for achievable. Make sure your applications are realistic. For me, if I was to set an application, I'm going to get up at 3:30 a.m. every day for a month and spend 3 hours in prayer before I start my day. Wow, that's an awesome goal, right? I'm not going to achieve it though. So don't shoot for the moon at the beginning. Don't set a goal so high that you will never make it and then you're going to get discouraged about it. Instead, set reasonable short-term goals. Once you achieve one goal, you set another higher one, then another one, and step by step, you work yourself up. R is for relevant. Your application should be relevant to the Bible passage you are studying, whether in church, Bible study, or personal devotions. The application should come out of the text. R is not for random. Okay, so for example, you're learning about the parable of the sower, about spreading the gospel seed, and you make an application to get up early and read the Bible. That's an awesome thing to do, but is it relevant to the passage? A relevant application from that passage might be praying for the lost, sharing the gospel with a friend, supporting a missionary, something of that nature. So make sure that the application that you make is related to the actual passage that you are studying that day. T is for time bound. When will you complete your application? It should have a time limit or it may never get done. So I'm going to say I'm going to love my wife by making her a special meal. And the next week someone says, have you done it? Oh, I'm going to. And then a month later, have you done it? I'm going to do it. Don't worry. And that can go on and on. No, the application must be time bound. It must have a clear point in time when it's going to be finished so that after that time you can judge and ask yourself, did I do it or not? So making the application even better, you could say, I will love my wife by making her a special meal this week. And then at the end of the week, you can make sure that you did it. So this lesson is quite a simple one, but it's really important and it can really transform our lives. Don't be a hearer of God's word only, but obey. Obey. Make smart applications. Every time you open up the Bible, ask yourself, what should I obey? Philippians 1:6 says, and I am sure of this, he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. If you keep on seeking to obey God's word, he will use that in your heart and he will transform you day by day.